is more. Vi en veimer angina, et titum suspect, let die.
The Highlands rose in steel. The heart of a warrior. The fury of a laird. The price of freedom. Freya Nyström. Epigraph. Love is like the mist of the Highlands. It can gently embrace you, or take your breath away like a storm. A rose does not need to preach. It simply spreads its fragrance. Mahatma Gandhi. Summary. The ruthless laird and the untamed warrior. A destiny shaped by betrayal. A love forged in steel and fire. Keira Fraser has carried a wound time has failed to heal, the mysterious disappearance of her brother when they were children. 13 years later, now the fierce and fearless leader of her clan, her world shatters when the merciless Sutherlands attack her home, forcing her to flee with her honor in ruins and the promise of vengeance burning in her chest. Wounded and without refuge, she finds shelter at Dunraven Castle, the domain of Alistair Cameron, a cunning and unyielding laird, feared by his enemies and revered by his people. A man who never fights battles that aren't his own. Yet the sight of Keira, battered but defiant, stirs a conflict within him. Will he risk his people for a woman who should mean nothing to him, or leave her at the mercy of her enemies? But the Sutherlands are not the only threat. In the shadows, secrets of the past conspire to tear them apart, and Keira will soon discover that the greatest betrayal may come from the one she least expects. Caught between loyalty and desire, pride and treachery, she must fight a war on two fronts, reclaim her home, and resist a man who could be her salvation or her downfall. Will the untamed warrior conquer the most difficult battle of all? Or will she surrender to the relentless laird, who threatens to break down all her defenses? Prologue. June 1646, beyond the walls of Caerlaverock. When a Highlander loves, he loves fiercely, for his heart knows no half measures. She had ridden all night without rest. Her body trembled, exhausted, and the cold seeped into her bones, but Alistair did not stop. Only when the first light of dawn painted the horizon in shades of amber and pink, did a sad smile cross her face. For a moment she felt the temptation to stop, to let herself collapse onto the damp grass and take a deep breath. But fear pushed her forward. She knew what she was doing was wrong. If her father discovered her escape, he would not hesitate to lock her away until the day he handed her over to her future husband, the man she had never loved, and to whom she had been promised years ago. She was barely 20, dressed in such tattered clothing that she could have been mistaken for a beggar, rather than the daughter of a man who sought to marry her off to the son of her clan's chief. But she had never cared for luxury, nor for the dull life of a maiden, confined to sewing in a room. Alistair longed for something more, adventure, freedom, and the chance to love the man who had truly won her heart. And now, more than ever, her only desire was to flee with him. Within her, still barely noticeable, a life pulsed, the child of Lachlan Sutherland, the only man she had ever loved. From the moment she first saw him, she knew she belonged to him. Lachlan exuded passion, bravery, and a magnetism that had utterly blinded her. He was nothing like Callum Fraser, her betrothed. That man, though from a good family and the future chief of her clan, was cold, distant, lacking the spark that set her soul alight. Lachlan, on the other hand, was fire, challenge, risk. And she had burned in his flames. The fate of their clans, the war their forbidden love might ignite, it no longer mattered. On spring nights beneath a starry sky, they had made vows of eternal love, and in one of those stolen encounters the fruit of their passion had taken root within her. Lachlan had been filled with pride when he learned the news. Alistair, however, had been terrified. Her father would never accept it, and the wrath of her clan would fall upon them both. That was when Lachlan had proposed something reckless, leaving everything behind, escaping far from Scotland if necessary, starting a new life where no one could tear them apart. "I will do anything for you and our child," he had whispered the last time they met, and Alistair knew it was true. There was no other woman for him, just as there was no other man for her. But everything had changed the day before. Her father, impatient, had moved up the wedding with Callum. It would take place in a matter of hours. The news had struck her like a tempest, stealing the breath from her lungs. She had planned to run away with Lachlan that very night, to leave behind the chains that bound them to a fate they never chose. And yet there she was, riding with nothing, unprepared, a fugitive driven only by desperation.
For all the gods, she cursed in frustration when her horse slipped in the mud.
It had rained all night, drenching her to the bone. The cold bittered her skin, but determination kept her upright. As the first light of day touched her, the breeze began to dry her hair, and her dress no longer clung to her body. Yet her spirits did not lift. The closer she came to the meeting place, the heavier her breathing grew. A knot tightened in her throat, the words caught there before she could even think of saying them. She was lost. She was terrified. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, "Think of your clan before yourself, Ailsa. Every action has consequences." And indeed they did. If she fled with Lachlan, the Frasers would see it as an unforgivable insult. War would be inevitable. Could she bear the weight of the bloodshed she would cause? Was her love stronger than her loyalty to her people? Tears blurred her vision, but she did not stop her horse. Around her the forest was waking, birds singing as if mocking her misery. Ailsa bit her lip, forcing herself not to cry. She had to keep going. Lachlan deserved an explanation. She owed it to him, and to herself. Her stomach twisted when, in the distance, she spotted the clearing where they had agreed to meet. She pulled her horse to a stop and closed her eyes for a moment. Her hands trembled on the reins. "It's the best choice for everyone," she murmured, trying to convince herself. "Except for you, Ailsa." And with her heart in pieces, she urged her horse forward one last time. The horse moved forward at the slightest pressure of her legs, though each step brought her closer to the inevitable. Ailsa saw Lachlan's silhouette standing against the morning mist, his posture as confident as ever, a smile on his lips. That smile. From the first moment she had seen him, it had the power to undo her, to melt any barrier she tried to build. And though she felt as if she were dying inside, she forced herself to return the gesture, though hers was sadder, more restrained. Lachlan looked more radiant than ever. The dawn's light caressed his copper-red hair, tousled slightly by the breeze. His face, rounded yet masculine, shone with the confidence of a man who believed his future was secure. His dark eyes, alight with emotion, held her with the same intensity as always. Only his nose, slightly crooked from a childhood injury, broke that perfection, but to Ailsa there was no man more handsome, no one more alive than him. When she was only a few meters away, Lachlan dismounted with ease. Ailsa noticed the saddlebags hanging from his horse, and knew they carried supplies, blankets and clothes for their escape. Yet when he realized she had brought nothing with her, the surprise in his eyes chilled her blood. "You can't imagine how long I've waited for this moment, Mokri," Lachlan whispered as he stepped forward to help her down. The moment her feet touched the ground, he wrapped her in a firm embrace, pressing her against his chest. Ailsa let herself be held, but when she tried to speak, her voice broke. A traitorous sob escaped her throat, and Lachlan moved, kissed the curve of her neck with tender reverence, cradling her gently. "Don't be afraid. The beginning will be hard, but together we'll build the life we want," he murmured, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. That was when he knew. Lachlan saw the truth in her gaze before she could even speak it. Ailsa tried to look away, ashamed of her own cowardice, hating herself for lacking the courage to defy her father. "What's wrong?" Lachlan asked, his voice barely containing his fear. "If your father has done something to you, tell me. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you."
"No," she whispered.
She forced herself to take a deep breath and lifted her gaze. "My parents don't know I'm here. No one does."
"Then don't cry.
From now on, you won't have to suffer because of them or their decisions," he said tenderly, trying to give her strength. Ailsa clenched her fists, as if that could help her hold firm to her decision. But in the end, the words came like sharp daggers, tearing her soul apart with each one. "I can't go with you, Lachlan. He stepped back, as if her words had struck him like a physical blow. "Why are you saying this?" His voice was filled with disbelief and pain.
"Last week, we agreed to run away together."
"I don't want to defy my father." They moved up the wedding. "Tomorrow, I'll marry Callum." The words sat heavy in her mouth like stones. "They decided it without asking me, and I'm afraid if we run, my father will hunt us across all of Scotland. And when he finds us, he won't hesitate to kill you before sending me to a convent forever." Lachlan shook his head desperately.
"We'll hide well, I swear it."
"And I would never let your father's men hurt us." "I love you," he said fervently, taking her hand and placing it over her belly. "And I love our child. I'll work tirelessly to give you both the life you deserve." Ailsa nodded, unable to stop the tremble in her lips. "I know. But I'm afraid of always living on the run, of constantly fearing we'll be found." A shadow, something dangerously close to tears, flickered in Lachlan's eyes, but he cleared his throat uncomfortably, as if refusing to let her see. "Do you love him?" His question was a grave whisper. "Your future husband?" "No," she answered, with a force that surprised even her. She placed both hands on Lachlan's chest and felt the furious pounding of his heart. "My heart belongs only to you. But I love my family too, and if I run, I'll disgrace them before all the clans. The Frasers will declare war on my father, on you. And I have to think of my people. I can't be selfish and condemn them because of my choice. Please understand, Lachlan. I love you, I swear it. I would follow you to the ends of the earth, but my duty is to marry Callum." "Damn Fraser," Lachlan muttered, turning away from her abruptly. Lachlan paced back and forth, unable to contain the fury and pain churning inside him. He felt Ailsa slipping through his fingers like sand, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His fists clenched with restrained anger. Without even knowing him, he already hated Callum Fraser because he was about to steal the only thing Lachlan loved in this world, Ailsa and the child she carried in her womb.
"That man will do nothing against your family," he declared fiercely, turning to face her.
"Please, Ailsa, let's run away. I love you." Lachlan stepped toward her and placed both hands over her belly, his touch filled with devotion and desperate plea. "Please don't take my child away from me," he whispered, his eyes glistening with emotion. "I want to see him grow, to teach him what love is, to show him the world and let him know how much I love him. How much I love you." "Why are you so sure it will be a boy?" Ailsa asked, attempting a smile despite the tight knot in her throat. "In my family, only sons have been born. He will be a boy, strong and brave like his father, and as clever and skilled as his mother." Ailsa smiled sadly. She didn't want to take away Lachlan's chance to raise his son, but deep down she knew she had to. That child would be born within her marriage to Callum Fraser, and the world would believe he was his. She couldn't bear for her son to be considered a bastard, nor for him to lose his rights as the future leader of the Frasers. She also had to think of his education, and though her heart was shattering into pieces, she knew that with Callum, he would have a more stable life than one filled with endless flight and fear. Lachlan reached out his hand to her, his eyes pleading. "Come with me, Ailsa. Let's build a life where no one else controls us." Ailsa hesitated for an instant. Her heart waged a fierce battle against her own reason. She wanted to take Lachlan's hand, to leave everything behind, to live life on her own terms, without impositions, without chains. She knew she would be happy with him, she knew his love. But reality struck, with the brutal force of a winter storm. She understood the consequences of her choice. And yet, as if her body moved on instinct, she grasped Lachlan's hand. His eyes burned with a fierce intensity, a glimmer of hope lighting up his face. Gently, Lachlan lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm before tilting his head up to kiss her lips, those lips he had longed for and claimed countless times before. But then, reality crashed down on her like a stone sinking to the bottom of a river. It wasn't just her future at stake. Lachlan was offering her a life of uncertainty, of constant running, of ever-present danger. Her clan would never accept their union, but worst of all, neither would Lachlan's father. Their child would not be recognized as a Sutherland, but as a nameless bastard, condemned to be an outcast in both clans. Ailsa trembled. She couldn't allow it. She had grown up with the pride of her lineage, with the certainty of belonging to a clan that provided protection and stability. She couldn't condemn her child to a life without roots, to always be a shadow with no place in the world. And no matter how much Lachlan loved her, he couldn't change that reality. In his youth and passion, he might not see what she did, that love alone wasn't enough to survive in a world ruled by honor and blood. And then there was something more. The certainty that Lachlan was a warrior, a man born for the battlefield. If she followed him, she would always live in fear that he wouldn't return, that one day their child would be left without a father to protect him. What would become of her, a woman alone with a child everyone would call a bastard, a child neither of their clans would ever recognize? The answer was painful but clear. She let go of Lachlan's hand as quickly as she had taken it. Her eyes filled with tears when she saw the confusion and sorrow in his gaze. "I can't," she whispered, her voice as fragile as ice breaking. Lachlan frowned, as if he couldn't comprehend her words. Ailsa placed a trembling hand over her belly, still barely noticeable but real enough for her. It wasn't just her life at stake, it was her child's. And for him, she had to choose the safest path. "I'm sorry, Lachlan," she murmured, feeling her heart split in two. She clung to him as if doing so could stop time, as if the world ceased to exist beyond that moment. She loved him. And she knew she would never love her future husband the same way.
But when she pulled away, looking into his eyes, she slowly shook her head.
"I can't go, my love," she said, her voice breaking.
"There's nothing I want more right now, but I can't."
"Come on, Ailsa, please," Lachlan exclaimed, frustration bleeding into his voice. "We've been together for years, and your parents never found out. No one knows you're pregnant. How can you think they'll find us if we go south, even to England? It's madness. Your father doesn't have the means to track us." "I know, Lachlan. But you don't understand what he's like," she answered, terrified. "I've seen how he treats my mother, and I don't even want to imagine what he'd do to us for dishonoring him." Lachlan clenched his fists tightly, barely containing the rage and helplessness consuming him. He clicked his tongue and turned slightly away, unable to keep looking at her, knowing that in mere minutes he would lose her forever. He pictured her in another man's arms, giving herself to a stranger. Ailsa wept inconsolably. She stepped away from him, unable to face him, feeling weak and miserable for betraying the love Lachlan had given her. But as she turned, an idea ignited in her mind. Maybe not everything was lost.
"Nothing has to change between us, Lachlan.
Even if I marry Callum, we can still see each other. I'll do everything I can to escape and meet you somewhere hidden and safe." The thought of keeping their passion alive, of prolonging what they had shared, gave her a flicker of hope. It would be her escape, her reason to endure the monotonous days in her husband's fortress.
But when she looked up, the light in Lachlan's eyes had vanished.
The hardness in his expression sent a shiver through her. There was no trace left of the man she loved, only dense cold shadows. Something dark stirred in him, a latent fury, a contempt she had never seen before. He took a step toward her, and for the first time, Ailsa instinctively stepped back, fearing she had said something that had wounded him beyond repair. "I don't want a woman who sleeps in her husband's bed at night and whenever she pleases comes to roll in mine, leaving her scent on my sheets," Lachlan spat, his voice sharp as a blade. "If you're not mine alone, I don't want you at all." Ailsa felt a lump in her throat. Her heart shattered with every word. She had never heard such coldness in his voice before.
But what hurt the most was realizing that, in that instant, she had lost him completely.
The love she had nurtured for years seemed to evaporate in mere seconds. "Lachlan, I love you," she sobbed. He shook his head. "I don't believe you." "Not anymore," he said bitterly. "To avoid humiliating your father, you'd rather humiliate me."
"That's not true, my love." She tried to touch him, but Lachlan pushed her away and stepped back.
"Go. I don't ever want to see you again," his voice was a dagger piercing through her. "I hope you're happy in your marriage." He turned on his heel and strode toward his horse. Ailsa reached out a trembling hand to him, desperate. "Lachlan, please don't hate me," she pleaded, but he didn't respond. He remained silent, his back tense, his fists clenched. The weight of betrayal suffocated him. Rage consumed him, pain choked him. He couldn't look at her, because he knew that if he did, he would see the reflection of everything they had been, and everything they would never be. Ailsa, trembling, turned and mounted her horse. Scalding tears streamed down her face. Lachlan wouldn't follow her. He wouldn't come after her. She had lost him. And yet, as the sound of hooves echoed through the trees, Lachlan lifted his gaze one last time. And that was when he understood. Lachlan remained still, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. The hope that had once shone in his eyes slowly faded, like a candle snuffed out by the wind. And without another word, without another promise, Ailsa rode away, each pounding hoofbeat tearing a piece of her soul from her body. The sound of hooves striking damp earth gradually faded into the morning mist, leaving only the sharp silence that precedes a storm. Lachlan watched Ailsa's silhouette disappear over the horizon, each beat of his heart hammering in time with the fury growing inside him. Moments ago he had been a man willing to risk everything for love. Now, betrayal burned through him like the searing brand of freshly forged steel. His eyes, darkened by the shadow of resentment, locked onto the spot where Ailsa had vanished. His lips curled into a bitter smirk, and when he spoke his voice was barely a whisper laced with venom. "Goodbye, Ailsa. I will never forget that you abandoned me.
But don't worry, I'll make sure you never forget it either.
I swear it, on the child growing in your womb." The cold morning air carried his words away, blending them with the dampness of the forest. Lachlan took the reins of his horse and with a sharp tug, turned in the opposite direction. He rode off without looking back, without giving his heart the chance to waver. As he galloped, his mind worked with ruthless precision. It didn't matter how long he had to wait. It didn't matter how far Ailsa tried to run. One day, when she least expected it, when she believed her decision was nothing but a distant memory, he would return. And when he did, he would leave a mark on her life so deep she would never be able to erase it. The wind lashed against his face, but it wasn't enough to cool the resolve burning inside him. He had been a man in love, devoted, selfless. Now he would become something else. Something Ailsa would never be able to ignore. Betrayal had a price, and he would make sure Ailsa paid for every last coin of her debt. Chapter 1. Keira Castle, 1657. Time tears away even the thorns of the most beautiful rose. Scottish proverb. The echo of two children's laughter rang through the forest near Fraser Castle. Keira and Ronan ran between the trees, skillfully dodging branches and roots with the ease of those who had grown up in the wild. They had managed to escape from Morag, the castle's housekeeper, whose shadow had chased them for as long as they could remember. Tired of her constant watch, they had decided to slip beyond the walls where no adult could find them. Ronan, the firstborn and heir of Clan Fraser, led the escape with determination. At just 10, he had already demonstrated exceptional skill with both sword and bow, training alongside his father's men. Keira, 2 years younger, shared his passion for battle, though she couldn't match her brother's sharp wit and quick thinking. Still, Ronan insisted on competing with her and teaching her the basics of combat, ensuring she could defend herself if the need ever arose. "Aren't we getting too far from the castle?" Keira asked, glancing back uneasily. "Oh, come on, Keira, are you scared?" Ronan teased. "We've been planning this for days. Just a few more steps, and I swear we'll go back before Morag notices we're gone." But his sister suddenly stopped, her expression darkened by a worry Ronan knew all too well. "If Mother finds out we snuck out, she'll lock us in the dungeons," she murmured, her voice trembling. Ronan let out a laugh and pulled her into a warm hug. He was taller than Keira, and his red hair blew in the wind as he playfully ruffled his sister's, which was the same fiery shade. He couldn't imagine life without her. Keira was his anchor, the voice of reason he often ignored, but that was always there to remind him of the consequences of their mischief. "Mother won't do anything," he assured her confidently.
"I don't even think she'll notice."
"You know how she is." Keira didn't look convinced, but before she could argue, the sound of hooves crashing through the undergrowth cut through the moment. A chill ran down Ronan's spine as two riders emerged from the trees. Their gazes met the children's, and Ronan frowned when he noticed that their kilts bore no Fraser colors. Instinctively, he stepped in front of Keira, his hand sliding to the dagger hidden in his boot. He didn't have his sword, but at least he wasn't unarmed. The older of the two men dismounted calmly, studying them with an intensity that made their skin prickle.
"What do you want?"
Keira asked, her voice firm despite its childish tone. The man smiled, revealing teeth too perfect for a mere mercenary. His posture and clothing hinted at status, but Keira couldn't place him. "We've come for the boy," he announced in a deep voice. Keira felt the blood drain from her face. "You won't take me," Ronan declared bravely, gripping his dagger's hilt. The man shook his head, as if the boy were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Your fate has already been decided, young Ronan. Your parents have agreed to send you with us." Keira turned to her brother, expecting to see the same horror in his eyes that she felt in her own. But in Ronan's gaze there was no shock, only the slow realization of something he had suspected but refused to believe. "No," Ronan murmured, shaking his head.
"That's not possible."
"Your parents made a deal with Lackland Sutherland. You are now his heir, and there is nothing you can do about it." Keira felt a scream clawing at her throat. It wasn't possible. They couldn't separate them.
But there was no chance to run.
The riders were swift, seizing them with firm hands. Ronan struggled with all his might, but he was just a child. Keira screamed his name as they dragged him away from her. The day of the separation was pure torment. Keira cried until her body could take no more. Her mother, Alistair, seemed to wither away in silence, and Callum Fraser did not utter a single word about the decision he had made. The official story given to the people was that Ronan had vanished, kidnapped by unknown enemies, to avoid scandal and disgrace. But Keira never believed that lie. And as she stared at the castle walls with tear-reddened eyes, she swore that one day she would become strong, that she would learn to fight like a man. One day, she would avenge her brother. Chapter 2. Fraser Castle, 1670. Wherever I wander, wherever I rove, the hills of the Highlands forever I love. Robert Burns. 13 long years had passed since her brother had been taken away right before her eyes, and she had been powerless to stop it. The memory of Ronan still burned within her, and she had never been able to forget what had happened, for every night in her dreams she relived that fateful moment. When she had regained consciousness and stumbled back to the castle still dizzy, she had faced the worst and most dreaded reprimand of her life. Even after all this time, Keira could not forget the look of disappointment in her father's eyes, or the sorrow that emanated from her mother. Callum Fraser had always maintained friendships, or at least mutual respect, with the lairds of the surrounding clans in Scotland, and though Keira barely knew the others, none had ever dared to question his honor before his children. They had never discovered what had truly happened to young Ronan, and Keira could still feel the lingering resentment in her parents' gazes. Over the years, her father's anger had faded, and he had gradually begun teaching her about the clan once more. But her mother had never been the same. Alistair had refused to speak for months, her grief and bitterness consuming her until they weakened her body beyond repair. 2 years after Ronan's disappearance, she had fallen ill and died. The most painful part for Keira had been discovering the letter her mother had left behind, in which she asked for her daughter to keep her dowry, and not to blame herself for her sorrow. The material possessions meant little to Keira, but her mother's abandonment left a wound in her heart that had never healed. She was guilty of sneaking out of the castle that morning, and at times she blamed herself for her mother's despair and her brother's fate. She had loved Ronan, and would never have allowed anything to happen to him. For years Alistair's anguished cries had haunted her, echoing in her mind and piercing her soul.
But she had learned to push through the pain.
At 22, Keira had suffered more than most, but she had also learned invaluable lessons. She had spent years watching her father, realizing that he had long since lost hope of ever finding Ronan.
But she had not.
Though her brother was now 23, and she might not even recognize him if they crossed paths, Keira was determined to find him. Even if it took a lifetime, even if she had to send letters to every laird in Scotland, she would not stop searching. She had not yet inherited the clan's leadership, but she knew the time was near. Her father had fallen ill months ago, a strange lung disease weakening him until he was permanently bedridden. And there she had left him that very morning. A cold breeze brushed against her pale face as she stepped through the castle gates. Since her brother's disappearance, Keira had taken up the sword, training relentlessly every day to become the best warrior in the Highlands. And now, another morning had begun. She had become a woman who commanded attention wherever she went. She knew she did not go unnoticed, though she assumed it was due to her martial bearing. But it was more than that. Her radiant beauty turned heads among the young warriors of the clan, and while some had tried to court her, Keira had made up her mind, she would never marry. For weeks now she had been toying with a young man who had recently arrived at the castle, but that was all. Nothing more, at least on her part. Despite the heavy tunic she wore, Keira could not hide the curves of her body, or the way her hips moved as she walked. She was taller than most women her age. Her red hair was braided down her back, though when she was not training she preferred to wear it loose, letting the wind play with it. Her face, angelic in beauty, had changed since the day Ronan was taken. It had grown more guarded, more serious, though there was a quiet strength in her expression. Her large blue eyes were the most striking feature of her face, reflecting both her intelligence and the deep sadness she carried within. A straight nose led down to full, rounded lips, completing a breathtaking face that many admired in silence. Her pale skin flushed slightly from the April morning chill, but the weather did not concern her. She was simply grateful it wasn't raining. Training in the rain was a nuisance. Approaching her father's men, she offered them a smile, ready to begin. "Good morning," she greeted. "I believe this is the first time I've trained with you." Two of the warriors grinned and nodded. They were around her father's age, perhaps 45, but they were far more robust. "Your father has always forbidden it," one of them said. Keira raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that, Bruce? Or have you simply avoided facing me, for fear that I might best you?" Bruce and Donald laughed. She had known them all her life, and after what had happened to Ronan, they had stood by her. They had never blamed her. Instead, they had supported her at every turn.
"That remains to be seen," Donald interjected with a smirk.
Keira nodded, giving instructions to the men to begin the training. She raised her sword with steady hands, ready to give it her all.
"Let's begin."
Keira Fraser was a woman forged in the fire of adversity, a warrior whose soul had been sculpted by loss and responsibility. From childhood she had learned that love and protection did not always come when most needed, and that the wounds of the past could either become scars or shackles. She had chosen the former. Life had never granted her the luxury of vulnerability. No arms had lifted her when pain had brought her to her knees, no voices had whispered comfort in the darkness. She had learned to stand on her own, to harden her heart like the steel of her sword. But deep within her, beneath her unyielding resolve, Keira longed for something she had never allowed herself to desire, a true connection, a refuge where she would not have to be only the leader, the protector, the heir to a lineage that demanded more than a single soul could bear. The blade of her sword sliced through the air before clashing against her opponents. Keira barely felt the strain. Her movements were swift, precise, each strike calculated with the discipline of years of training. Around her, the other warriors panted from exertion, but she remained steady. A drop of sweat rolled down her temple to her cheek, yet she did not allow herself to be distracted. Her adversary, a young clansman who had attempted to court her more than once, smiled with confidence, but Keira already had him cornered. Suddenly, the hurried sound of footsteps on gravel alerted her. A maid was running toward her, her face pale with distress. "Milady Keira," she called urgently. 1 second. Keira replied, focused on her fight. It's your father, milady. He's gotten worse. Her opponent's blade found an opening in her defense, slicing through the fabric of her sleeve and leaving a shallow cut on her forearm. Hey! Keira protested. I wasn't looking. Her opponent shrugged with a grin. Sorry, that was my revenge for my nose. Keira narrowed her eyes and without missing a beat, pressed the tip of her sword against the young man's throat.
That was nothing compared to what awaits you in our next training session.
The young man stepped back, still smiling.
We'll see about that, milady Keira.
She allowed herself a small smile, pleased that her fellow warriors treated her as an equal. But her amusement vanished the moment she turned back to the maid. Mary's eyes were glassy, her voice unsteady. Milady, your father just vomited blood. He says he feels like he's drowning. A chilling sensation ran through Keira's body.
What? She asked, but she didn't wait for an answer.
Turning to the warriors, she commanded, That's enough for today. Malcolm, go fetch the healer now. Without waiting for confirmation, she took off toward the castle, her heart pounding. Her father had suffered relapses before, but he had never coughed up blood. That could only mean one thing, the end was near. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time, and before reaching the door to her father's chamber, she could already hear his deep, ragged coughing. A familiar, gnawing fear tightened around her chest. She paused with her hand on the door handle. What if he looked at her with the same contempt he had the day Ronan disappeared?
But she could not afford fear.
Forcing herself to take a deep breath, she pushed the door open. A foul stench hit her instantly. Alcohol and something else, something rancid and diseased. She instinctively covered her nose and stepped inside. Her father lay in bed, pale as wax. A servant hurried to pull the sheets over him, but Keira caught a glimpse of the purplish sores on his legs. What is that smell? She asked, fighting the urge to gag. It's his wounds, milady, the maid murmured. They've begun to rot. Keira swallowed hard and stepped closer to the bed. Her father had never looked so frail. The strength of the laird of the Frasers had faded, leaving behind only a man consumed by illness and years of resentment. She sat beside him, feeling the walls of her own pain begin to crack. Without thinking, she took his hand and held it tightly between hers. Father, I want to ask for your forgiveness again for Mother. I'm so sorry for your grief. Callum's glassy eyes struggled to focus on her. His lips moved with effort. Keira leaned in, and at last she heard the words she had waited her entire life to hear.
It wasn't your fault. Her heart seemed to stop.
She barely had time to react before her father grasped her sleeve with surprising strength for his condition. Forgive me, Keira, Callum whispered, his voice breaking. I let madness blind me, and I failed to see the truth. A deep, ancient pain mixed with an unexpected sense of release filled her chest. Father.
But the words caught in her throat.
The silence in the room was broken only by Callum Fraser's ragged breathing. His skin, once hardened by the Highland winds, was now pale and slick with cold sweat. With great effort, he lifted a trembling hand, signaling Keira to remain quiet. She obeyed instantly, holding her breath as she watched him struggle to speak. But before he could form a word, a violent fit of coughing racked his body, bending him in pain. Blood stained the linen draped over his chest, and when he finally regained a fraction of his breath, his voice was weak, like the dying whisper of a candle about to go out. You will be an excellent leader for this clan, he said with difficulty. You are the finest warrior I have ever seen. Emotion tightened Keira's throat. Her father had never spoken to her this way. He had always demanded more, had always looked upon her skill with a blade with disdain, as if strength were a flaw in a woman. If you ever find yourself in trouble, Callum continued, pausing for breath between each word, you must go to the laird of the Camerons. Keira frowned. Father, you've never had trouble with other clans. Why would I? Callum looked at her with an intensity that made her chest constrict. With an urgency that unsettled her, he insisted. Promise me. She nodded, uneasy about the direction of his words. All right, father. I promise. A shadow of relief crossed the dying man's face. Alistair Cameron is a good man, and a friend. He would help you without hesitation. Keira nodded, but her mind was still trying to grasp why her father had brought this up now. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. Why are you speaking as if you're saying goodbye, father? Because I am dying, Keira, he whispered. And you must take the lead. His trembling hand lifted, brushing against his daughter's cheek. Keira, overcome, turned fully toward him. In his blue eyes, she saw a silent plea, a wish that this wasn't happening. Callum gazed at her with tenderness and in a voice so faint it barely reached her ears, spoke words that sent ice through her veins. I am so proud of you, and if you ever see Ronan again, do not blame him for not being my son. The air seemed to leave Keira's lungs. Her body tensed, her heart pounding furiously. She couldn't have heard him correctly. In disbelief, she searched her father's face for any sign that this was merely the fever speaking, but the calm in his expression told her otherwise. He wasn't delirious. What are you saying? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Callum gave a faint smile and parted his lips to answer, but before he could, another coughing fit seized him. This time it was worse. His body arched violently, as he fought desperately for air. Keira lunged forward, terror gripping her. Father, she cried. She ran out of the room, throwing the door open, and nearly collided with the healer and Malcolm. Quickly, he can't breathe. The elderly woman rushed to the bed, leaning over Callum as Keira stepped back, her legs trembling. The sight before her was unbearable. Her father was fighting to hold on to life, but death was already claiming him. The healer did everything in her power to ease his suffering, but after a few agonizing minutes, the blue tinge in his face and the sound of his final breath escaping his lips made the truth undeniable. The room fell into absolute silence. No. Keira whispered. Then with a broken scream, no. Father. She threw herself at Callum's lifeless body, gripping his shoulders and shaking him desperately. You can't die. Please, she begged, but the body in her arms remained still. The healer stepped back, shaking her head. Behind her, Malcolm approached and placed firm hands on Keira's shoulders. Come, Keira, he murmured gently. He's gone. No, she choked out, her eyes brimming with tears. He had to tell me something, Malcolm. He can't die without telling me. The warrior didn't try to argue. Instead, he wrapped an arm around her and carefully pulled her away from the bedside. Keira fought against him, but her resistance shattered the moment the door closed behind them. It was then that she understood the terrible truth. Her father's pain had died with him. Chapter 3. Life is a rose, each petal an illusion, each thorn a reality. Alfred de Musset. The melody of the bagpipes floated through the air, haunting and solemn, blending with the whisper of the wind across the hills. Keira let herself be enveloped by that sorrowful music, though it was not as sorrowful as her own life. Before her the priest chanted a prayer, words she barely heard because nothing could console her. Beside the grave, the piper played his instrument with devotion, ensuring that it would help her father find his way to his ancestors. She had kept vigil over Callum's body all night. She was exhausted, not just physically, but deep within her soul. Uncertainty consumed her. If Callum was not her true father, how could she ever know who was? The doubt had taken root in her mind like a thorn lodged in her heart. She knew she did not resemble Ronan, but she had convinced herself that at least they shared the same blood. Now, however, she questioned it. Still, her father had chosen her to lead the clan, a decision only a true father would make, not one imposed by fate. Lifting her gaze, Keira felt the first drops of rain mingling with her tears. She took in the landscape she had chosen for Callum's final resting place. She had not buried him in the cemetery beside her mother, but atop a hill overlooking a vast green valley. Malcolm had told her it was her father's favorite place, and Keira wanted to grant him peace in the place he had loved so dearly in life. Around her, the castle's inhabitants stood in attendance, especially the warriors who had fought alongside Callum. Though she had earned their respect with her strength and courage, she feared they would not accept her as their leader. There were also the maids and servants who had faithfully served her father, weeping with genuine sorrow. "May the soul of this brother rest in peace," the priest intoned solemnly. Keira wished for it with all her heart. Nothing else mattered in that moment. Not Ronan's disappearance, not the lie about her origins, nothing. She just wanted to stay there, alone in the silence of her grief. The bagpipes fell silent, and the ceremony came to an end. One by one the mourners began to leave, allowing Keira to grieve in solitude. Just when she thought she would finally be alone, a murmur cut through her like a dagger. "He never got over young Ronan's disappearance." Keira knew the maid had not meant any harm, but the weight of guilt struck her with fury. She was responsible for what had happened. She had dragged her brother into an uncertain fate with her childish stubbornness. Closing her eyes, she let the tears flow. She knew someone was watching her, but she refused to turn around. Until she heard that voice. "The new clan chief is crying." Keira turned sharply. There he was, the only man in the clan who had managed to break through the armor she had built around her heart. Finley looked at her with a sad smile, and slowly stepped closer until he was by her side. He had arrived at the castle recently. Until not long ago he had lived on the borders of their lands, but he had decided to join her father's warriors before Callum fell ill. From the first day, Keira had felt something different about him. He was not like the other men who had tried to win her over with empty words. Somehow he had slipped past her defenses, though all that had passed between them were fleeting encounters and chaste kisses.
"It's the first time I've seen weakness in you," he remarked softly.
"I am not weak," Keira replied, frowning. Finley said nothing, only pulled her into his arms and held her firmly. Keira let herself sink into his warmth, into the sensation that the ground was trembling beneath her feet, but as long as he held her, she knew she would not fall. "I know," he whispered against her hair. "You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever known." Keira gave him a sad smile but did not reply. She did not see herself that way. If she truly were strong, she would not feel as if the world was crumbling around her. "My investiture as clan chief is at midday," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Malcolm believes that if we delay, an enemy clan might attack." "Will the village leaders arrive in time?" Finley asked with concern.
"Yes.
Dara made sure to send messengers as soon as my father died. I've thought a lot about it, and I know someone could take advantage of this power vacuum to seize control. My father had no enemies, but those who took Ronan might try again." Finley remained silent before asking, "And who were they?" Keira shook her head. "We don't know because my parents never revealed it, but I do know they weren't ours. That's all. I don't remember." Silence stretched between them until the cold rain forced her to react.
"We should head back."
Finley nodded, and accompanied her to the horses. Keira cast one last glance at her father's grave before riding away, saying nothing. She could not afford any more weakness. Not now. The castle bustled with unusual activity, from the first light of dawn. Servants and maids hurried through the halls, ensuring that everything was ready for the midday ceremony. Keira, however, felt as if her mind were drifting elsewhere, far from the constant agitation around her. She forced herself to focus. Soon she would be invested as the chief of Clan Fraser, and she could not allow herself to be lost in thoughts of the past. As she bathed in the large wooden tub, she let the warm water relax her tense muscles. The weight of responsibility loomed over her shoulders, heavier than she had imagined. Though she had made certain decisions since her father had fallen ill, it had always been him who had the final word. But now every choice would rest on her. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to ease the tightness in her stomach. A knock on the door pulled her from her reverie. "It's Morag," a raspy voice announced. Keira smiled tenderly and let her in. As the door closed, she stepped out of the water and began drying herself. Morag, her nursemaid and the castle's housekeeper, approached and caressed her cheek affectionately. "My girl," she whispered with infinite tenderness. Keira felt her throat tighten. Morag had been by her side for as long as she could remember, more of a mother to her than Ailsa, whose bitterness had been an insurmountable wall. The old woman had scolded her harshly after Ronan's disappearance, but she had also been the first to hold her when guilt threatened to consume her. "I am so proud of you, my girl." "Thank you, Morag." As the old woman gathered the clothes from the floor and handed them to a maid for washing, Keira began to dress. She refused to wear the green velvet gown embroidered in gold that had been made for the occasion. She was not a woman of the court but a warrior, and warriors did not wear dresses. Instead she donned woolen trousers in the Fraser clan colors, a white shirt, and the tartan that draped across her torso, fastened at her shoulder with a golden brooch bearing her family's emblem. When she looked at herself in the mirror, Morag stood beside her watching her with pride. Keira took a deep breath, and without thinking too much, let out the question that had been lingering in her mind ever since her father had confessed the truth. "Did you know that my father wasn't Ronan's father?" The look of terror on Morag's face confirmed what she already suspected. Keira turned to her and took her by the shoulders.
"Why did you never tell me?" "How did you find out, my girl?" the old woman asked in a trembling voice. "My father told me before he died, but he couldn't say more." Morag nodded sorrowfully. "And so it must be. But it's not fair. I've been lied to my whole life. I want to know what happened, and who my real father is." "That I don't know, Keira," Morag replied with sadness.
"Your father confessed to me that Ailsa was already pregnant when they married, and that the child wasn't his. In fact, I don't think she ever told him who the real father was." "Is that why my mother was so bitter?"
"Yes."
"Your grandfather arranged the marriage, and she never accepted it, though your father tried in every way to make her happy." "I'm sorry, my girl. I can't tell you more." Keira sighed, disappointed. For a moment she had believed Morag might have answers, but her mother's story remained full of gaps. The investiture of Keira. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Malcolm's head appeared through the gap. "Keira, the first village leaders are arriving." The young woman nodded and took a deep breath. She had prepared her whole life for this moment, yet nerves consumed her. After a few seconds, she walked toward the door, with Morag following closely behind. However, the old woman stopped at the threshold and let her go on alone. Keira lifted her head with pride, pushing away the shadow of doubt, and swiftly descended the stairs. At the castle's entrance, she saw the first warriors dismounting from their horses. The stable hands were already prepared to take the reins. Malcolm and Dara welcomed them with camaraderie, as they were men who had served under her father's command. Keira approached with a smile, and when she saw the newcomers bowing before her, she shook her head. "No, please. I am no more than any of you, my friends. I know you were my father's companions, and I consider you the same. There is no need for such formalities. You are home." "Thank you, milady," one of the men said. "Keira," she corrected. "I would like all of you to call me by my name." "Understood," another man agreed with a smile. More leaders began to arrive. In total, about 30 men from across Fraser territory had gathered to swear loyalty to her. Keira knew them all, as her father had held countless meetings they never failed to attend. After a few minutes, she led them to the great hall, where an abundant feast awaited to restore them from their journey. The tables were set before the high table, where Keira sat beside Dara and Malcolm, the two warriors most loyal to her father and the clan. With them at her side, she felt protected, and knew she could count on their unwavering support in all her decisions. "I hope the food is to your liking, gentlemen," she said before taking her seat. She could barely eat a bite throughout the meal. Her nerves churned her stomach, and though she tried to hide it, she found herself pushing the meat around on her plate without daring to take a single piece. Malcolm joked with her to ease the tension, but even that couldn't make her relax. Her gaze wandered over the guests, some familiar, others not so much. Yet what unsettled her most was the uncertainty of whether all of them would accept her leadership. She feared that because she was a woman, some might refuse to swear loyalty, which could spark an internal war within the clan. Dara, noticing her concern, reassured her in a low voice that he had spoken to many of them, and that most viewed her appointment favorably. They believed in the renewal her leadership would bring to the clan. After a couple of hours, when everyone had enjoyed the exquisite dishes prepared by the cook, Keira stood and announced, "Now we will move to the smaller hall to proceed with the oath." A murmur of approval swept through the room, and before the men could rise, she added with a smile, "Do not worry, gentlemen. Once we are done, there will be countless barrels of whiskey waiting for you." Cups were raised in celebration, and Keira was the first to leave the hall, as it was her duty to lead the way. With measured steps, feeling the dampness in her hands and the barely perceptible tremor in her fingers, she made her way to the platform prepared for the ceremony. From there she watched as the clans gathered in their places, exchanging glances among themselves, waiting to see who would be the first to step forward. It was Malcolm who stepped forward without hesitation. When he was barely a meter away, he knelt and drew a dagger, raising it solemnly. His eyes met Keira's before his voice echoed through the hall. "I, Malcolm Fraser, kneel before you, Keira Fraser, to offer and swear my loyalty. When you need me, I will be there. When you seek me, I will be there. In any circumstance, I will defend your honor and that of the clan. If necessary, I will spill my blood for you, and for our land until death chooses to take me." A lump formed in Keira's throat. Her eyes filled with restrained tears, but she managed to smile before responding in a firm voice. "So be it." Dara followed the same ritual, speaking the same words. One by one, all the village leaders under her command swore their loyalty. No one hesitated. No one refused. When it was all over, Keira took a deep breath, feeling an unexpected relief. For a moment, her fears dissolved. She had been accepted as the leader of Clan Fraser. "Thank you all," she said sincerely, inclining her head. "Now let's return to the hall. A celebration awaits us, one this place hasn't seen in a long time." Malcolm gave her a smile before leaving with the others. From the doorway, the clamor of filling cups and echoing laughter could already be heard. However, Keira felt the need for fresh air before joining them. She turned toward the exit, but hadn't taken more than 2 steps when Dara's voice stopped her. "Is something wrong?" she asked, noticing the seriousness on his face. The warrior shook his head. "I have a bad feeling, Keira. Though they've all sworn loyalty, and we have a leader, I fear that an enemy clan might see this as an opportunity to strike." Keira frowned. "What makes you think that?" Dara exhaled slowly, as if his own thoughts unsettled him. "Reality. They will see us as weak, because you are a woman. Then we will show them that Keira Fraser fears no one. We will prepare for any threat." Dara nodded with a half-smile. "Will our leader not join the celebration?" Keira shook her head. "Later. I need some air." She was stepping into the courtyard when a voice broke the silence. "Congratulations, Chief Fraser." Keira turned. Finley stood there leaning against a cart, a lopsided smile on his lips and a feline glint in his eyes. He approached her at a leisurely pace and without warning, grabbed her waist, pulling her forcefully against him. "Come now, Keira," he murmured in a husky voice. "Let's celebrate properly." Keira opened her mouth to protest, but Finley took advantage of the moment to kiss her, invading her mouth with a possessiveness she hadn't expected. She tried to push him away, pressing her hands against his chest, but he only held her tighter. A spark of fury ignited inside her. She wasn't going to allow this. Keira frowned and shoved Finley harder, trying to push him away once and for all. But he didn't budge. His confident smile remained, laced with an audacity that sent a chill down her spine. "I know you want it," he murmured, leaning toward her again. A spark of fury lit up Keira's eyes. Without giving him time to react, she drove her knee up with precision, landing a sharp blow to his groin. Finley doubled over with a groan of pain, clutching his stomach as a curse escaped his lips. "I hope this makes it clear that I want nothing to do with you," Keira snapped, her voice firm without a hint of hesitation. I'll try to forget that you just tried to force a kiss on me, out of the friendship we've shared these past months. But if you ever come near me again with such intentions, the punishment will be far worse. Her tone was ice cold, an irrefutable warning that Finlay couldn't ignore. Keira had never given him any reason to think there could be anything between them beyond camaraderie, had never shown even the slightest hint of interest. And yet here he was believing he had some kind of right over her. She didn't like resorting to violence, but she would never allow anyone to underestimate her. Turning on her heel, she walked away without sparing him a second glance. Her heart pounded furiously, not from fear but from the indignation burning in her veins. She didn't notice the shadow of hatred darkening Finlay's eyes as he watched her go. She didn't see the curl of resentment twisting his lips, or the dark promise of vengeance taking root within him. Chapter 4. A rose is a rose, but a rose shed is love. The night had been long, but Keira had barely managed to sleep. After a celebration that stretched until midnight, she had been the last to leave the hall. Though her body begged for rest, she knew that as the hostess she couldn't retire before her guests. And so, with exhaustion weighing on every muscle, she forced herself to remain standing. One by one the visitors withdrew to their assigned rooms, promising to depart at dawn. Keira, on the other hand, made her way to her chamber alone, and without bothering to undress, collapsed onto the mattress. She felt as though she couldn't go on any longer. Her body demanded that she stop, if only for a few hours. And yet, when the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, she realized she had barely slept for 2. She didn't care. Rising with determination, she crossed the room and approached the basin to wash her face, hoping to shake off her weariness before changing. The cold water helped her fully awaken. As she dried herself, her gaze drifted to the large window overlooking the main courtyard and the forest surrounding the castle. That was when she saw it. Something glinted among the trees, a brief unnatural flash. She frowned, stepping closer to make out what it was. Her eyes flicked to the courtyard, but everything seemed in order. The men stationed along the walls remained at their posts. Yet Keira instantly knew that what she had just seen was no accident. A shiver ran down her spine. Her heartbeat quickened. "We're under attack," she shouted at the top of her lungs. She didn't stop to change. Snatching her belt and sword, she bolted from her chamber. Dara's warning echoed in her mind, his fear of an imminent assault. She hadn't expected it to happen so soon. "We're under attack," she called again from the staircase. "Everyone to the courtyard." Taking the steps 2 at a time, she rushed to the main doors where she found Malcolm and Dara. "What's happening?" Malcolm asked, instantly alert. "There's movement in the forest. Someone is using a mirror to signal someone inside the castle. If they were allies, they wouldn't need to hide." "Understood," Malcolm responded immediately. "I'll warn the warriors. I'll also alert the guests. Even if they aren't fighters, they must assist us." "I want everyone gathered in the courtyard in less than 5 minutes," Keira ordered. Rage burned in her blood. She didn't know who was behind the attack, but she would prove that Keira Fraser was not someone to be trifled with. When the warriors had assembled, she addressed them with a firm voice. "We have intruders in the forest. We don't know when they'll strike, but we will defend our castle and our clan. We are Fraser, and today we will prove it with our strength and unity. Prepare for battle." She had barely finished speaking when a cry rang out from the battlements. A sentry toppled over, an arrow buried in his chest. Outside, a war cry tore through the air, and to Keira's horror, the massive fortress gate swung open with ease. Someone had removed the heavy wooden beam that secured it, replacing it with a mere spear that snapped at the first blow from the attackers. "Who the hell did this?" Keira roared, realization dawning on her. There was a traitor within the castle. Turning, she met Malcolm's gaze, seeing her own concern mirrored in his eyes. "You understand, don't you?" her mentor asked. "Someone from inside helped them. Maybe one of the guests." Keira shook her head. Too obvious. I think it's someone from the castle, trying to frame another. Before they could continue theorizing, the battle began. At the Fraser war cry, Keira threw herself into the fray, her sword carving deadly arcs through the air. Her skill surpassed that of many of her men. Soon blood stained the stone. An enemy caught her attention. Fraser bitch, a warrior spat, licking his lips. It'll be a pleasure to gut you. Keira held his gaze and smiled. You can't imagine the pleasure it will bring me to rip your guts out. The man struck first, but she deflected every blow with cold precision. Her opponent began to sweat, his exhaustion evident. When Keira saw her chance, she drove her sword into his abdomen. He fell to his knees before collapsing. Before she could turn to another enemy, strong hands grabbed her and pulled her away from the center of the fight. Malcolm and Dara dragged her to a secluded corner. What are you doing? She demanded, furious.
This doesn't look good, Dara said gravely.
It'll be worse if we stop to talk. Malcolm held her firmly. We need to call for reinforcements. If you stay here, they'll kill you the moment the battle is lost. But if you go to Dunraven and find Alistair Cameron, we'll stand a chance. With his men joining ours, we can win. Keira shook her head fiercely. She would not abandon her people. The flames lit up the night, casting ghostly shadows along the castle walls. Keira could barely hear her own breath over the chaos of battle, the clash of steel ringing in her ears. Her people were falling. Her castle was lost. And now Malcolm was asking her to flee. Are you mad? She snapped, glaring at him. You're asking me to abandon my people to beg for help. Why don't you go instead? Keira. Malcolm roared, gripping her shoulders tightly. They will kill you. What they want is the castle, our lands. If our leader dies, no one will guide us, and we'll fall into their hands. We will lose everything. It has to be you, lass, Dara interjected, his face hardened with urgency. If you don't go, this will be the end of our clan. If you leave, you can save us. We'll hold them off long enough for you to escape to Cameron lands. Then we'll surrender and wait for your return with reinforcements. Keira averted her gaze for a moment, and her heart clenched. In the middle of the courtyard, several of her men lay motionless, their blood soaking the ground. Others could barely stand. She forced herself to close her eyes for a moment, struggling to organize her thoughts. She wasn't convinced by the plan, but the truth stood before her with cruel clarity: they couldn't win. Finally, she nodded grimly. They were right. If she fell, no one would be left to bring help. Come, there's no time to waste, Malcolm said, taking her arm and leading her toward the stables. Good luck, Chief, Dara added before turning back to the fight. We're counting on you. The path to the stables was a desperate dash through the remains of battle. A few enemies crossed their way, but they managed to evade them with little difficulty. To her surprise, Keira found her horse saddled and ready. We were planning a hunt, Malcolm explained, handing her the reins. That's why they're prepared. If all goes well, you'll reach Cameron Castle in 3 days. Keira nodded, but uncertainty gripped her as a new question struck her. Which way do I leave? The main gate is swarming with Sutherlands. Malcolm smirked. Through the back. Keira's heart stopped for an instant. Since her brother's disappearance, she had never used that exit again. It was through that door they had escaped that fateful night. It was through there that Callum was lost forever. I can't. Unless you'd rather charge straight through the Sutherlands.
That would make quite a show, he said with a wry tone.
Keira sighed. From there she could hear the warriors' shouts. There was no time for hesitation. She cast one last look at Malcolm. Promise me you'll still be alive when I return. The warrior shrugged, with a crooked smile.
I don't think I can promise that.
Keira held her breath before bolting. She reached the back door and banged on it urgently. Making sure the path was clear, she slipped out. She mounted her horse and spurred him forward, not looking back until she reached the edge of the forest. From there she turned her gaze toward the castle. A red glow illuminated the courtyard. Something was burning. Her heart clenched. She had failed her father, her clan. She forced herself not to cry, but helplessness burned in her chest. That was when she saw him. Atop the wall, standing among the enemy, a silhouette sent an eerie shiver down her spine. She lifted her gaze, and the man smiled with malice. Keira felt ice crawl along her skin. Finley. Her former friend. Her traitor. Horror mixed with fury as she saw the bow in his hands. She understood in an instant, it had all been a lie. He had only deceived her to gather information and pave the way for the enemy's entrance. So you're the traitor. Hatred consumed her. For a fleeting moment, she considered turning around and running him through with her sword. But she had no time. A sharp whistle cut through the air. The impact threw her forward in the saddle. A searing pain tore through her shoulder. She glanced down, seeing the arrow embedded in her flesh, the tip barely protruding from the other side. A strangled gasp escaped her lips. She lifted her eyes and met Finley's triumphant smile. "I swear I'll kill you, even if it's the last thing I do," she murmured through clenched teeth, her voice laced with pain and fury. Without wasting another second, Keira turned her horse and spurred it forward with all her strength. The forest closed in around her, its shadows embracing her as she fled. Behind her remained the screams of battle, the echo of betrayal, and the fire consuming her home. But she would return. And when she did, she would make Finley pay with his own blood. Being the chief of her clan meant being the unshakable pillar, the one who provided security and direction, the one who carried the hopes and fears of her people without revealing her own. But who held up the one who held everyone else? Keira knew that weakness in a leader was a dangerous luxury, that misplaced compassion could destroy as much as cruelty. And yet, deep in her chest burned the desire for something beyond war and duty. Perhaps her greatest battle was not against those who sought to destroy her, but against herself, against the fear of surrendering, of trusting, of discovering that beneath her unyielding armor, a heart still beat, longing to be loved without it meaning the loss of her strength. Would she be able to find the balance between her duty and her soul? Or would her legacy be only that of a warrior who fought for everyone, except herself? Chapter 5. My heart is in the Highlands, wherever I go. Robert Burns. After enduring the longest day of her life, riding with an arrow lodged in her shoulder, Keira could barely stay on her feet. Pain gripped her, her muscles stiff with exhaustion, and Finley's betrayal weighed heavier on her than any wound. Her entire life had changed in a matter of hours, and she struggled to process it. Worry for her clan gave her no respite. She couldn't stop wondering how many of her people had fallen to the Sutherlands' blades, and what had become of the survivors. Her greatest fear was the fate of the young women in the castle. Many were inexperienced, barely more than girls, and the mere thought of what the invaders might do to them made her stomach churn. More than once during her journey, she found herself considering turning back. But she knew she had to press on. She couldn't fail them. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, Keira realized she needed to stop and rest. More than that, she had to tend to her wound. She had treated others countless times, but she had never dealt with an injury this severe on herself. Reaching the edge of a forest, she decided it would be a good place to spend the night. From there the valley stretched below, offering enough visibility to spot any threats, whether man or beast. Dismounting was an ordeal. A searing pain tore through her shoulder, forcing a strangled gasp from her lips. Her legs wobbled as her boots met the ground, dizziness washing over her as a thin sheen of sweat coated her forehead. She forced herself to take slow deep breaths. Fever was creeping in, she could feel it, but she couldn't afford to give in. Her father had protected their people until his last breath, and she would do the same. She wouldn't let the Sutherlands enslave the Frasers without a fight. "Damn it," she muttered, struggling to tie her horse's reins with one hand. Somehow she managed. Exhaling through clenched teeth, she stumbled into the trees, searching for dry leaves and branches to start a fire. She knew the heat would keep predators away, and she needed flames to cauterize the wound. When she finally got a small fire going, she watched the flickering flames, exhaustion momentarily dragging her under. She slumped beside the fire, the ground tilting beneath her, the world spinning. If anyone attacked her that night, she wouldn't even have the strength to lift her sword.
But she couldn't surrender.
She had to keep going. Forcing herself to move, she pulled a dagger from her boot and held it over the fire. With her good arm she touched the fabric of her shirt, feeling the sticky warmth of fresh blood. She had lost too much. If this continued, she would never make it to Cameron Lands. She thought of Alistair, of the things she had heard about him. Would he help her, or would he turn her away like so many had done to the Frasers? The uncertainty settled in her chest like a stone. Drawing a deep breath, she set her jaw and began unbuttoning her blood-soaked shirt. She peeled the fabric away to examine the wound, tearing the sleeve and shoulder to fashion a crude bandage. Then she inhaled once more, bracing herself. She had no choice. She gripped the arrow tightly, and before fear could take hold she yanked it out in one swift motion. The scream that tore from her throat shattered the silence of the night, its echo rippling through the trees. Tears, unbidden and unwelcome, streaked down her face. She collapsed onto the grass, her vision darkening at the edges.
But she couldn't let go.
If she didn't seal the wound, she would bleed out. For the Frasers, she whispered through ragged breaths. She seized the glowing hot dagger, and pressed it to the open wound. A final anguished cry rang through the forest before darkness swallowed her whole. Malcolm ran a hand over his face, feeling the swelling where the Sutherland laird had struck him. He spat to the side in disdain. After giving Keira enough time to escape, he and Dara had made the difficult choice to surrender. The Sutherlands had taken the castle without hesitation, cutting down anyone who dared resist. More than a dozen of their fallen clansmen had lain in the courtyard for hours before they were finally tossed beyond the walls and set ablaze. He had tried to negotiate a proper burial for the dead, but Lachlan Sutherland had only sneered at him. Worse still, as night fell, the man executed several of the resistance leaders right there in the castle courtyard. Malcolm and Dara had pleaded for their lives, but their words had fallen on deaf ears. Now, locked in the dungeons with the rest of the Fraser warriors, all they could do was wait for their fate. Malcolm had at least attempted to get them held in the castle chambers rather than the filthy cells, but Lachlan had denied him with a cruel smile, and then beaten him to his knees in response. "The Sutherland left your face unrecognizable," Dara joked from the other side of the cell. Malcolm smirked bitterly. "If I stay here much longer, there won't be much left of me to recognize." A heavy silence settled between them. They both knew the worst was yet to come. Malcolm let out a sad smile before turning to Dara. In that wretched corner of the dungeon, 5 men shared the cramped space, some bearing wounds that in such filth would never heal. "At least I was handsome once," Malcolm said, his tone laced with irony. "And to think I wasn't supposed to see another night." Dara chuckled softly, then grew serious. "Do you have any idea what those damned Sutherlands want?" Malcolm shook his head. "It's strange. No clan attacks without reason, and we never set foot on their lands. Not even Callum spoke ill of them." He moved slowly toward the tiny window, staring at the darkening sky. "It's almost nightfall. Do you think Keira is safe?" "Damn right she is," Dara snapped. "She'll do whatever it takes to reach Cameron Lands as fast as possible." Malcolm gave a faint smile and clapped him on the back. "Never tell her this, but that girl's got more guts than my horse." A few warriors chuckled under their breath, grateful for the brief reprieve from their misery. "I just hope she's all right," Malcolm murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "Who? Your precious Keira?" The sound of that voice made every head in the dungeon snap upward. Standing before them, wearing a cruel smile, was the last man they ever expected to see. Finlay. Once they had considered him a loyal brother in arms. Now he looked down at them like insects trapped in a jar. Malcolm stepped toward the bars, his face unreadable. "I never liked you, you son of a bitch." Finlay's smirk widened as he shrugged. "Poor Frasers, so easy to deceive." "She's your clan too." The real Finley is long gone, picked clean by vultures. I am a Sutherland. Malcolm's fingers curled tightly around the bars, rage burning in his veins.
What the hell do you want from this clan?
You'll find out soon enough. Finley tilted his head mockingly. But for now, you were worried about dear Keira, weren't you? Malcolm's heart stopped for a second.
What have you done to her?
If you expected her to come back with help, you're sorely mistaken. I saw her flee, and just couldn't resist testing my bow on her.
Bastard.
A real shame, Finley taunted. By now your Keira is either bleeding out in some forsaken forest or worse, surrounded by wild beasts. Don't hold your breath for her rescue. Malcolm yanked at the bars in fury, as though his sheer strength could free him. When I get out of here, you'll be the first one I come for, you damn traitor. Finley's laughter echoed through the dungeon halls before fading into the darkness. A heavy silence fell over the cell, as the warriors processed the news. Malcolm looked at Dara, who returned his gaze with unease. Could it be true? After finding out he's a traitor, I can't believe a word he says. But if he saw her leave, maybe he did shoot his bow. We have to trust our chief's strength. No one replied. The revelation from Finley had left them breathless, but it wouldn't be the only surprise of the night. An hour later, the dungeon door creaked open again. They heard steady footsteps on the stone floor, until a figure stopped in front of Malcolm and Dara's cell. Both lifted their gaze, and recognized the man who had locked them up. Lachlan Sutherland watched them with disdain. Malcolm stepped toward the bars again. I think we have a right to know why the hell you attacked us. Lachlan smiled, revealing perfect teeth. To settle the debt the Frasers left me 23 years ago. That's what I'm after. Malcolm frowned. We've never done anything to you. Maybe you don't know, but if your former laird's dear wife were here, she'd recognize me instantly.
Then why didn't you settle it with her when she was alive?
You think I didn't collect part of that debt years ago? Confused glances were exchanged, all eyes locked on Lachlan, who glanced toward a dark corner of the dungeon and nodded. The echo of footsteps reached their ears, and from the shadows emerged a young figure. The warriors held their breath. Before them stood a 23-year-old man, tall and broad-shouldered. His fiery red hair gleamed under the dim light, tied back in a ponytail. His face, once boyish, now held sharp square features, a straight nose. And those eyes. Ailsa's eyes. But gone was the innocence of childhood, replaced by a cold hatred that thickened the air in the dungeon. Ronan. Malcolm whispered, unable to believe what he was seeing. Malcolm felt a knot in his stomach. Despite everything he had suffered in the past few days, those words brought on an anguish he had never experienced before. Was it you who took Ronan? He asked, unable to hide the confusion in his voice.
Why the hell did you do it?
Lachlan Sutherland looked at him, with the satisfied serenity of a man who believed he held the truth in his hands. His smile was not mocking, but rather filled with a grim and dangerous conviction. Because your dear Callum took from me what was mine, my son. A murmur of disbelief ran through the imprisoned warriors. Some shifted uneasily in the cramped cell, as if trying to make sense of those words. Your son? Malcolm asked in astonishment.
Yes, Lachlan confirmed, savoring each word.
Ronan is my son. Did your leader know and never say anything, or did he simply choose not to accept it? And yet he raised him as one of you. The silence that followed was almost as suffocating as the dampness of the dungeon. The heavy air seemed to grow thicker, laden with secrets and revelations none of them had expected to hear. The leadership of this clan belongs to Ronan as well, Lachlan declared firmly. And now I'm taking back what is ours. Malcolm felt his world shift. How could this be true? His gaze landed on Ronan, searching the young man's face for any sign that confirmed what they had just heard. But why take him and now return with him? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lachlan smiled again, as if he had been waiting for that question. Because he needed to be raised as a proper laird. Firm and ruthless with those who would try to take what belongs to him, as they did to me. Your former leader took something from me, and I responded in kind. My duty as laird is to prevent injustice, and Ronan was being denied his rightful place in this clan. Malcolm felt the chill of those words deep in his bones. A shiver ran down his spine as he asked the next question. Are you really willing to claim your son's leadership, when he already belongs to another clan? Lachlan let out a dry, bitter laugh. No. Ronan is the rightful heir to this clan as well, and he will have the final say. Malcolm turned to Ronan, searching his face for any trace of doubt, hesitation, humanity. But all he found was an expression hardened by years of resentment, an accumulated hatred that seemed to have erased any ties to the past. Your sister never gave up hope of finding you, Malcolm said, his voice laced with urgency bordering on desperation. She would never harm you. Please, let's put an end to this. But Ronan didn't even blink. What I do with her is none of your concern, he replied, his tone so cold it sent a chill through everyone present. And now, if you'll excuse me. He turned and began climbing the stairs, disappearing into the shadows, leaving behind an unbearable void. Lachlan watched him go, before turning back to the prisoners with a look of disdain. Son of a bitch, Sutherland, Malcolm spat, his fury pulsing through every word. Lachlan held the torch with an unreadable expression. Every bit of suffering Ailsa caused me will be more than repaid, he declared before following Ronan into the darkness. The torchlight vanished with them, plunging the prisoners into deep shadow. Night had fallen. No sliver of light entered through the tiny window of the cell. Malcolm took a deep breath and turned to his companions, his expression hardened with determination. I hope that damned girl is safe, and that the Camerons come for us. If they don't, they'll kill us all. Silence spread like an ominous shadow over the dungeon. Chapter 6. Wherever a Scot may be, there is Scotland. William Drummond. Keira felt her body trapped between fire and ice. Fever consumed her from within, yet she trembled with cold. She tried to open her eyes, but the simple act seemed to demand more energy than she possessed. She struggled to remember how long she had been unconscious, but as she finally managed to focus her vision, she saw the horizon beginning to brighten with the promise of a new day. The memory of the searing pain struck her harshly. The image of burning metal against her skin returned to her mind with the same intensity as when she had felt her flesh being scorched. She tried to move, but the throbbing in her wounded shoulder pulsed with a force that seemed to rival her own heartbeat. A faint groan escaped her lips as she attempted it. The dampness of fever clung to her forehead and temples. She felt trapped between delirium and wakefulness, tempted by the thought of surrendering to eternal sleep if it meant an end to the suffering. But the need to survive was stronger. She forced herself to sit up, her trembling hands clutching the fabric of her shirt, feeling the roughness of dried blood stuck to her skin. She glanced down at the dark pool where she had lain and with a shaky sigh, was grateful she hadn't bled out during the night. The wound, though cauterized, had reopened. She tied the torn sleeve of her shirt around her shoulder, knowing it was a poor remedy, but the only one she had. The simple act of standing felt like a battle lost before it had even begun. She tried several times, each attempt followed by a wave of dizziness and pain that left her gasping. But the memory of her castle under siege finally pushed her to her feet. Her people needed their leader, and she couldn't afford weakness. With inhuman effort, she staggered toward her horse. Mounting was an ordeal. Every movement in the saddle was torture, a burning needle stabbing into her shoulder with each step. She closed her eyes at times, trying to focus on something other than the pain. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten the entire day before. The sun climbed higher as Keira continued on, forcing herself not to succumb to exhaustion. She drank from a stream along the way, cooling her parched throat and easing her fever slightly, though the heat still burned within her. Her only goal was to press forward, to reach Dunraven Castle before her body gave out completely. Hours later, as the sun began its descent, her vision blurred, and a crushing fatigue overtook her. Just when she thought she couldn't go on, she spotted a figure in the distance. She blinked several times, making sure it wasn't a hallucination. No, there were men, 20 maybe more, gathered in a clearing. Her heart pounded. She couldn't make out the colors of their kilts. She didn't know if they were allies or enemies, but it was too late to turn back. Taking a deep breath, she gripped her sword with her uninjured arm and rode forward. The men saw her approach. There were no shouts of alarm, no swords drawn, only looks of astonishment. Keira guided her horse between them, heading straight for the tallest one, the man who stood with unmistakable authority, speaking with another warrior of formidable build. When he finally turned to face her, Keira felt a knot tighten in her stomach. For a fleeting moment, she thought she was seeing an apparition. Her fevered mind made her believe she was staring at a deity, carved from stone. His dark eyes, sharp as daggers, pierced her with silent judgment. His strong jawline and shadow of a beard gave him an implacable air, as if the very winds of the Highlands had sculpted his severe expression. His black hair fell in untamed waves, evidence of a long day of hunting. Keira barely managed to stay upright in the saddle. This man didn't just radiate authority, he exuded an unfathomable strength. For the first time in a long while, Keira felt as if she had met someone who could rival her.
But she was in no state to prove her mettle.
"Help!" she whispered before her body gave in and the darkness claimed her. Alistair's men had packed their saddlebags, and were nearly ready to head home when startled exclamations spread among them. Alistair, tightening the girth of his mount, lifted his gaze with a frown, searching for the cause of the commotion. His eyes met Ewan's, his closest friend and right-hand man, who was staring at something behind him with an expression of astonishment.
"What in the devil?"
Ewan muttered, unable to tear his gaze away from whatever was approaching. The surprise on his men's faces stirred Alistair's curiosity, and he turned in the direction of their wide-eyed stares. What he saw left him stunned, bewildered, and furious. A woman was riding toward him, her gaze locked onto his. At first glance he noted that she was young, perhaps only a few years younger than him. But it wasn't her age that caught his attention, it was the state she was in. Her clothes were soaked in blood, and her right shoulder bore an open wound, explaining the stiffness in her arm. Yet it wasn't just her condition that put Alistair on edge, it was the sword she held, unsheathed.
Was she planning to kill him?
The idea was absurd, her unsteady balance on the horse made it clear she had no strength left. Still, he chose to wait until she was close enough to act. His men remained silent, watching in confusion, unsure how to react. When the woman's horse halted just a few feet from him, Alistair stepped forward. The sword trembled in her weak grip, and he was certain it would slip from her fingers at any moment. Then a voice, frail yet resolute, cut through the wind. "I seek Alistair Cameron," she whispered. The warrior narrowed his eyes and stepped closer, stopping beside her horse. "Who's asking for him?" The young woman parted her lips, but no words came. A faint tremor ran through her before her eyes fluttered shut, and the sword slipped from her grasp. Alistair saw her collapse and reacted instantly, catching her in his arms before she hit the ground. Her body was completely limp, and as he held her he felt the feverish heat radiating from her skin. "She's a Fraser," Ewan murmured behind him. The laird lifted his gaze to his man, then looked down at the brooch pinned to the torn fabric of the woman's bodice. The Fraser clan's colors were there, as clear as day. And not just any brooch, Alistair noted, frowning.
"That's the laird's brooch." "How is that possible?"
Ewan asked, unable to mask his shock. Alistair shook his head, equally puzzled. "I don't know, but we must return to the castle at once." With care, and with Ewan's help, he lifted the woman's body onto his horse before mounting behind her, securing her against his chest with one arm. Then he turned to his men. "Fergus, Duncan, ride to Sutherlands and find out what's happened. Be cautious on the road." "Understood, Chief," they answered in unison.
"The rest of you, gather your things.
We're heading back to the castle." With that he spurred his horse forward, Ewan riding beside him. As they advanced, Alistair thought of Callum Fraser. 2 years ago, after his father's death, the young Fraser laird had written to him, pledging his friendship and loyalty. In return, Alistair had sworn that if he ever needed his help, he only had to ask. And now, here in his lands, a woman bearing the Fraser emblem had appeared, covered in blood, seeking his aid. Alistair gazed down at the woman's pale face, feeling the warmth of her fevered body pressed against his chest. His hand rested at her waist, noting the firm contour of her stomach beneath the damp fabric. She was no fragile woman, he knew that at a glance, but a warrior. And yet, in her unconscious state, she seemed vulnerable. Her breathing was weak, and the ghost of her chilled breath against his skin unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Suddenly, she stirred slightly in his arms, a quiet whimper escaping her lips as her wound protested. Alistair clenched his jaw. He needed to reach the castle fast. What he hadn't expected was the strange sensation that settled in his chest when she instinctively nestled closer, seeking warmth. Even less had he anticipated the furious war in his mind, when her frozen breath ghosted over his neck, awakening memories he had long buried. No. He would not think of that. He spurred his horse forward with force, eager to reach the castle and rid himself of this feeling. Rid himself of her. The sensation of movement dragged her out of her fevered stupor. She wasn't in a rocking chair, though that was what she had first thought. The rhythm was steady but not mechanical, and soon she realized she was on horseback. Her back repeatedly bumped against something solid, warm, the chest of the man holding her. Finley. Could it be possible that her old friend and betrayer had found her? A knot of uncertainty tightened in her throat, but reason pulled her back to reality. The last thing she remembered before blacking out was a group of warriors emerging from the mist. She hadn't been able to make out their banner, but the image burned into her mind was that of piercing black eyes watching her with chilling detachment. If the hand holding her belonged to that man, then he was no god fallen from the heavens. The steady rhythm of hooves and the cool night breeze lulled her into an irresistible drowsiness. She tried to speak, to tell them she was searching for Alistair Cameron, that she couldn't afford to waste any more time, that they had to help her or let her go. But her exhausted, battered body allowed her only a faint whimper before dragging her back into unconsciousness. The silhouette of Dunraven Castle rose against the dark sky as midnight approached. Alistair and Ewan, relieved to have made better time without the burden of their hunt, watched from a distance as torches flickered and smoke curled from chimneys. Alistair urged his horse forward. If she's lost too much blood, she may not live long enough to tell me what the hell she wants from me. Ewan, riding beside him, cast him a skeptical glance. Do you think she'll survive? Alistair frowned, taking longer than usual to answer. I hope so. Because I'd march straight into hell if that's what it takes to find out why she came looking for me. The groan of rusted hinges cut through the night as the castle gates swung open. Just before riding through, Alistair turned his head and ordered, "Find the healer and bring her to my chambers." Ewan blinked. Your chambers? Is there a problem, Ewan? The warning in his tone was enough to silence any retort. Ewan shook his head and rode off toward the healer's cottage. Alistair dismounted and lifted the woman into his arms. She was far too light, her skin far too cold, but the faint mist of her breath in the freezing air told him she was still alive. Ignoring the curious stares of his men, he crossed the courtyard and entered the castle, taking the stairs two at a time. The laird's chambers were always prepared for rest. Waking Nyström to ready another room in the dead of night was not an option. He kicked the door open and stepped inside, carefully laying her on the bed. The fire's glow cast shadows across her fevered, sweat-slicked face. He sat beside her, watching as her body trembled from the heat burning through her. He hadn't even realized his hand had moved until his fingers brushed her cheek. Her skin was impossibly soft, and before he knew it, he was tracing the curve of her face in an instinctive caress. He only noticed he was holding his breath when he forced himself to pull away abruptly. Damn it, who are you? As if the universe itself had decided to answer, a deep, weary voice broke through the stillness of the room. Where is the girl I'm meant to heal? Alistair turned and found Fenella, the healer, standing at the threshold. Dressed entirely in black, her grey hair pulled into a tight bun, she carried her ever-present basket of herbs. Her lips curled in a faint smirk, always teetering on the edge of a mocking smile. "Come in, Fenella." The woman stepped forward, her sharp gaze shifting between Alistair and the wounded girl. "Who's she?" "We don't know," Alistair admitted. "She appeared in our path, as we were preparing to leave. She's lost a great deal of blood." Fenella leaned in, inspecting her closely. Her brow furrowed as she pulled back the blood-soaked bandages. "She's a Fraser," she remarked, a hint of surprise in her voice. Alistair tensed. "They are our allies. She must survive to tell us what happened. If the Frasers have been attacked, we must aid them." Fenella gave a silent nod, setting her basket on the table and pulling out her remedies. The wound had reopened, fresh blood staining the laird's sheets. The night, already long, was far from over. Fenella clicked her tongue at the severity of the wound, and the amount of blood Keira had lost. Her usually inscrutable expression hardened, as her fingers traced the fevered skin, pressing gently around the swelling. Experience told her she had seen men die from far lesser injuries, but she also knew that some clung to life with a defiance that challenged death itself. Alistair stood in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, his features etched with worry. He didn't know why this woman, whose presence had been insignificant in his life until that night, unsettled him so much. Perhaps it was the fragments of mystery that seemed to surround her, or perhaps it was the way that, despite her weakened state, her very existence had already begun to disrupt his world. Fenella straightened slowly, wiping her hands on a cloth before fixing her laird with a serious gaze. "My lord, it will take a miracle for this girl to survive." Her words hung heavy in the air, laced with the certainty of someone who had witnessed too much suffering to offer false hope. Alistair clenched his jaw, his gaze dropping to the woman lying in his bed, sweat glistening on her brow as she burned with fever, teetering on the edge of life and death. "Do whatever it takes," he ordered, his voice low but laced with grim determination. "I will not allow her to die under my roof." Fenella nodded, though doubt flickered in her eyes. Still, she turned to her basket, pulling out the necessary salves and herbs, while Alistair, unable to look away from Keira, wondered why, out of all the lives he had seen slip away without a second thought, this one seemed to matter so much. Chapter 7. Scotland is a country where even the light seems tinged with history. Alexander McCall Smith. Alistair hadn't closed his eyes all night. Seated in the armchair by the fireplace, he watched the slow but steady rise and fall of the young woman's chest. The healer had done everything in her power, though she held little hope for her. Yet Alistair knew this woman had more strength than she appeared to. There had been a critical moment in the dead of night, when he thought death would claim her at any second, but slowly her body had calmed, and the tremors had subsided. The question that circled his mind over and over was the same: what was she doing on his lands, and why had she been wounded? As dawn broke, exhaustion settled heavily on his shoulders. His entire body ached after a sleepless night, and the previous day's hunt, but he paid it no mind. With a sigh he rose to his feet, and upon hearing the servants stirring, he decided to call one of the maids. "Neve, go to my chamber and watch over the young woman there. She's badly wounded. If anything happens, alert me at once." The maid nodded in surprise, and hurried off to carry out his orders. Alistair, needing to clear his head, stepped into the courtyard, inhaling the crisp morning air. His men were already occupied with their morning tasks, when one of them approached with curiosity. "How is the lass we found yesterday?" "She made it through the night, but she's still in grave condition." Before he could say more, the castle doors swung open, and Fergus and Duncan strode in, urgency written across their faces. Alistair recognized their expressions instantly, and met them with a severe look. Fergus dismounted first, handing his horse off to Duncan, who led them to the stables. "We need to talk, Chief," Fergus said gravely. Alistair led them to his study in silence. Ewan joined them in the corridor, and at the sight of their faces, his own expression darkened. "Is the girl all right?"
"Yes, but the news Fergus brings is not," Ewan replied.
Fergus clicked his tongue as they entered the room. We've learned that Fraser Castle has been attacked by the Sutherlands. Alistair's brow furrowed. The Sutherlands? Fergus nodded. No one understands the reason for the attack. Callum Fraser never had enemies, but there are suspicions that… His voice trailed off.
Has Callum been killed?
Alistair asked. No, my lord. Callum died a few days ago from illness. On the day of his funeral, his daughter Keira was named chief. And the next day the Sutherlands attacked. Alistair and Ewan exchanged a look. And what do we know about the new chief? Ewan asked. They say she escaped, and the Sutherlands have put a price on her head. Whoever delivers her will receive a great sum of gold and land. Alistair sighed, pacing the room deep in thought. Could that girl be Keira Fraser? Ewan ventured. I've never seen her before, but she wears the Fraser brooch. It could be her, only she can tell us the truth.
If she wakes,
Ewan murmured. Alistair felt his stomach tighten. The possibility of the young woman dying before revealing her identity unsettled him more than he cared to admit. But if she truly was Keira Fraser, why had she abandoned her people? A true leader never ran.
There's nothing we can do until she wakes, he concluded.
If she is Keira Fraser, we will decide what to do with her then. Chapter 8.
Scotland is a world apart.
A country with its own rhythm, its own soul, and its own history. One of Lachlan Sutherland's men knocked on the study door, and from inside came the laird's miserable voice. The door was opened at once, and Malcolm Fraser was shoved into the room. Lachlan wasn't alone, Ronan was there too. His heart clenched at the sight of him. For years he had searched for his brother, clinging to the hope of finding him alive, but as he took in what he had become, Malcolm felt hatred begin to take root in his chest. The two warriors who had escorted him stepped back, though they didn't bother untying his wrists. Malcolm raised his bound hands and shook them slightly. Do you fear me so much that you'd rather keep me tied up? He asked with mockery. Lachlan smirked, but Ronan, standing by the window, remained emotionless. Malcolm noted with some distaste that the study was kept in perfect order. The books on the shelves were meticulously aligned, and the papers on the desk were stacked in precise piles. Lachlan rose slowly and approached, that same smug smile still on his lips. I suppose you're wondering why we brought you here, Fraser. Malcolm nodded with feigned seriousness. I imagine you missed me. He never saw the punch coming. The blow took him by surprise, and he tasted the metallic tang of blood in his mouth. Running his tongue over his split lip, he spat at Lachlan's feet.
Well, I expected something like that.
Don't play games with me, Fraser. You're here because of the whore you chose as your clan's leader. The insult toward Keira made Malcolm clench his fists, but as he saw Ronan stepping closer with a furrowed brow, he forced himself to stay calm. Our friend Finlay said he saw her flee, and managed to wound her in the shoulder, Lachlan continued. But we've tracked the area, and there's no sign of her. Malcolm smirked.
I don't see the problem.
That lass has more guts and wit than all the men in your clan combined. All she's proven is that she's a coward. At those words Malcolm lunged at Lachlan, grabbing him by the tunic and pulling him close. I won't allow you to speak of my lady that way. But he couldn't finish the sentence because Ronan struck him hard in the ribs, knocking the breath from his lungs, and forcing him to double over. He coughed several times before regaining his breath, and when he lifted his gaze, his eyes locked onto Ronan's with absolute contempt. I curse the days and nights I wasted searching for you, he spat. Your father would turn in his grave if he saw what you've become. Ronan didn't even flinch. My father cared little for my life, he replied coldly. He chose to put a man in my place who didn't even carry his blood. Have you never considered that maybe he didn't know? Malcolm growled, straightening with effort. Lachlan cut in with a cruel smile. We are not here to talk about the dead, but about Ailsh's daughter. I want her head on this table to make up for the harm her damned clan did to me.
The clan did nothing to you, Malcolm shot back.
It was Ailsha. You should have settled it with her. Lachlan shrugged.
This is the best revenge.
I made her suffer the loss of her son, and now I'll do the same with her daughter and her clan. I've waited a long time for this, and I intend to enjoy it. Malcolm stood tall, defiant. You won't have time to savor it as long as I still breathe. Lachlan's punch came swift, snapping Malcolm's head to the side. We've spread the word that we're looking for your chief, and the price on her head is so tempting that even your own neighbors would betray her to claim it. If you don't tell us where she is and make our job easier, someone else will. I don't know where she is, Malcolm replied firmly. She vanished in the middle of the fight, and I haven't seen her since.
Liar!
Ronan roared.
You're her right hand.
You know all her movements. Keira doesn't need babysitters, Malcolm retorted with irony. If she's escaped, that's your problem. Lachlan shook his head as he stepped closer. You're wrong, Fraser. This isn't just the girl's problem, it's yours as well. If she doesn't surface in 3 weeks, we'll start killing your people one by one. And you'll be the first. At least my death will be for defending my clan. Yours won't be remembered by anyone. Lachlan clenched his fists, barely restraining his anger. Remember that, and tell your people, Fraser. 3 weeks. Without another word, Ronan shoved him toward the door, and silently escorted him back to the dungeons. At Dunraven Castle. Neve hurried down the stairs as if the devil himself were at her heels. The moment she stepped out of the laird's chamber, she collided head-on with another servant, who cursed in Gaelic. But Neve didn't care. Alistair had been clear, if anything happened with the guest, she was to inform him immediately. And after 6 days of waiting, the fact that the young woman had finally awakened was a relief. Since her arrival, the laird had been irritable, showing an uncommon interest in the mysterious stranger. Have you seen the laird? She asked a passing servant. He nodded and gestured toward the courtyard, where Alistair was training with his men. Neve ran to the exit and upon reaching it saw most of the clan warriors engaged in combat drills. She hesitated for a moment. She knew Alistair hated interruptions, but he had also insisted on being informed about the girl. Taking a deep breath, she descended the steps more cautiously. Approaching the group, she cleared her throat to draw the laird's attention. Ewan, who was facing her, caught her nervousness, and raised a hand to signal Alistair. Frowning in annoyance at the interruption, Alistair turned swiftly, but upon seeing Neve, his expression grew even more severe. What is it, Neve? The maid swallowed and nodded, afraid of being reprimanded. The young woman has awakened, my lord. A murmur ran through the group, but Alistair ignored it. He sheathed his sword with a firm motion and turned to his men. Keep training. He glanced at Ewan and added, You're in charge. The warrior nodded, as Alistair strode toward the castle with purposeful steps. He moved quickly, eager to see the girl with his own eyes. Once inside, he thanked Neve for her diligence and dismissed her. He climbed the stairs, his mind focused on the questions he needed answered, considering how best to extract the truth. First he would ensure she was well, then he would demand explanations. Reaching the upper floor, he felt a strange tension within him. It wasn't the first time he had interrogated someone, yet something about this young woman unsettled him. Perhaps it was the image of her unconscious, the inexplicable way her presence had affected him. He stopped in front of the door, his hand hovering over the handle, recalling Fergus's warning. If this girl truly was Keira Fraser, then he might have a traitor under his roof. Inside the room, Keira's heart pounded violently. The silence was oppressive, and the uncertainty of being in enemy territory kept her on edge. She tried to steady her breathing, but a sound made her tense, footsteps approaching. She held her breath and pressed herself against the door, gripping a basin of water in her hands, ready to defend herself. The handle turned slowly. Keira watched as the door creaked open and without thinking swung the basin upward. But before she could strike, the intruder moved with startling speed, as if he had anticipated her attack, and caught her wrist before the blow could land. Keira growled, struggling against his grip. Her other arm, numb from the wound, was useless, but her legs were still strong. Alistair had no time to react, before she landed a precise kick to his shin. He grunted in pain, but his grip didn't loosen enough for her to break free. She attempted a punch, but he was ready. With overwhelming skill, he caught her once more and pulled her against him. Keira slammed into his chest, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Before she could recover, the warrior's deep voice surrounded her. "What in the devil's name do you think you're doing? Is this how you repay our hospitality?" She opened her mouth to retort, but as she looked up and met those dark eyes, her resolve wavered. She didn't think, she simply acted. With a swift motion, she drove her knee into the warrior's groin. Alistair's growl filled the room, his expression twisting into that of a furious demon. Panic clawed at Keira's throat, and she spun on her heels, determined to escape. But a sudden yank at the bandage on her shoulder stopped her. A sharp pain shot through her body, and she let out a genuine cry of agony. A sudden wave of dizziness washed over Keira, a weakness that forced her to lean against the wall behind the door. Several seconds passed before she could lift her head, only to meet those dark eyes once again, drilling into her with restrained fury, as if he wanted to annihilate her right then and there. "Who are you, and what do you want from me?" she asked through clenched teeth, forcing herself to ignore the stabbing pain in her side. She watched as the young warrior arched a brow and slowly stepped closer, studying her with an implacable gaze. Despite her discomfort, Keira straightened and lifted her chin proudly, furrowing her brow to avoid showing any weakness. She waited, defiant, for his response. "I don't think I'm the one who should be answering questions, girl," the warrior replied, his voice laced with anger. "You're the one who crossed my lands without permission, and then tried to kill me like a common assassin." Outrage flared in Keira's chest. "I am no assassin," she thundered, her voice echoing in the room. "I woke up in a strange place with a strange girl, and when I tried to speak to her, she ran away. Then you appeared, like some avenging demon. To me, you're as much a stranger as all of this." She gestured angrily around the room. "I don't even have my clothes, and I don't know where we are. You can understand why I might have thought you intended to kill me." The warrior gave her a cold, humorless smile. "And why would I want to kill you?" he asked with biting sarcasm. "At least, until a minute ago." Keira swallowed hard, unsure of how to answer. "If you want me to reconsider the idea that you tried to kill me," he continued, "then tell me who you are." The young woman hesitated. She didn't want to reveal her identity without knowing exactly who she was dealing with, but she also needed to get out of there as soon as possible to seek the help her people desperately needed. Finally, she took a breath and answered, "I am Keira Fraser, leader of my clan. And I must find Alistair Cameron." The warrior stepped closer, reducing the distance between them to a dangerous degree. Keira felt a wave of tension ripple across her skin. From this proximity she could sense his breath, the raw strength emanating from every fiber of his being, and it unsettled her as much as it drew her in. "And why are you looking for him?" he murmured, his voice so deep and rough that it sent a shiver through her. Keira hesitated, but if her answer would grant her freedom, she was willing to give it. "My clan was attacked by the Sutherlands," she finally admitted. "Before my father died, he told me that if I ever found myself in trouble, I should seek Alistair Cameron's help. That's why I must leave at once. Return my clothes, and I'll be on my way immediately." The young man shook his head. "You're not leaving yet, lass. You miserable bastard." Keira burst out, furious, raising a hand to slap him. But he was faster, catching her wrist midair with a firm, commanding grip. "You're mistaken again," he said calmly without letting her go. "You're not leaving, because you've already arrived where you wanted to be. I am Alistair Cameron. I am the man you're looking for." Keira felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The shock hit her like a violent gust of wind. "What?" Alistair released her, and she took a step back, suddenly dizzy. She closed her eyes for a moment, cursing herself for not recognizing him earlier. The colors of Clan Cameron had been right there, plain as day, in his kilt. She had made an unforgivable mistake. And we didn't abduct you, Alistair continued, his tone tinged with exasperation. You came to us wounded, seeking my help, but you lost consciousness before you could tell me. We brought you to my castle, healed you, and I gave you my own room because it was the only one prepared. You have been treated as a guest. Keira felt a flicker of shame. But after trying to kill me, and now knowing who I am, that changes things. She narrowed her eyes, a bad feeling creeping over her.
What do you mean?
It means you'll stay here until I decide what to do with you.
You can't keep me here.
Keira shouted, her eyes blazing with rage and desperation. My clan needs me. Alistair turned away and strode toward the door. You should have thought of that before leaving them to come find me. I didn't abandon them. Keira felt tears threaten to spill. I was forced to come. You are now on my land and under my power, he said, ignoring her pain. And I make the decisions here. He opened the door and stepped out, shutting it firmly behind him. Keira ran after him, pounding on the wood with all her strength.
You can't do this to me.
I am Keira Fraser, and I demand that you let me out. Only silence answered her. Alistair Cameron walked away, leaving her alone, furious, and with only one clear decision: escape and save her clan on her own.